Hello, my name is Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, April 12th West weather update brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Really, over the last 48 hours or so, our snowmelt season has begun across the western United States, really across the southwest U.S. specifically. This graphic here is looking at the upper Colorado River Basin snowpack for this winter, November 1st, all the way through April 12th here. That's that black line at the top, and it's just kind of blowing all the other years out of the water. You can see the highly anomalous above average snowfall we've seen across the upper Colorado River Basin, coinciding with some very low lake levels in Lake Mead in the news at the end of last year, and Lake Powell certainly in the news for very low lake levels early spring this year. So kind of interesting to see that juxtaposition where we're low in terms of the water levels in those reservoirs on there, but we're building up that bank, that snowpack, that's just kind of waiting to be melted into the hydrology, into these reservoirs as we go through these warmer weeks now, getting out into April, getting out into May. And we're seeing that really already beginning here. You'll notice that black line at the top there. That's 2023 of this year, and it seems we've reached the peak. And if we kind of look out into the forecast later in the video, confident that we've reached that peak snowpack in the upper Colorado River Basin. We're entering that snowmelt season, where we'd expect some of these reservoirs to respond in the coming weeks to some of this water as it makes its way right through the streams and the rivers in northern Arizona, southeastern Utah, and far southwest Colorado. Similar story across California, maybe more so the southern Sierra Nevadas versus the north, where it's been a bit warmer over the last 48 to 72 hours. If we focus in on the southern Sierra Nevada snowpack, I'll kind of zoom that in here to make it more visible. You can see that record snowpack we reached this year. That 300 number is 300% of normal. That's that blue line here for this year, 2022, 2023 water year. Our normal year on this graph is that light blue curve all the way at the bottom. The previous max, as far as this data is concerned, is that red line there. We've kind of even blew past that record there. I do think we've likely, at least for the southern Sierra Nevadas, reached that peak here perhaps just a few days ago, and I would expect some sort of melt activity to continue just predictably, climatologically, as we go on into April, May, and June in the northern hemisphere and in California. We're going to predictably warm up those temperatures and start to melt some of that snowfall. Now, I'll say we do see something of a warm-up this weekend, but we're trying to avoid a rapid warm-up that would melt a lot of this record snowfall all at once. That would only continue to stress, potentially concerningly so, some of the reservoirs and rivers and the flooding that we've already seen across California this spring. And I can say now, before even getting into the forecast, we're not seeing a strong kind of heat wave or warm-up signal sustained that would cause that kind of concern yet. That's not to say we don't have flooding risks or concerns going forward. We'll cover some of that here in the next few slides, but we're not seeing anything kind of catastrophic in terms of it all melting at once, and we don't want to see that. We didn't see that last week when we looked out into the forecast. We're not seeing it yet as well. It is something we'll keep an eye on as we get into May and start to deal with some of the snow melt. Now, some of the issues we've been talking about this year was the Tulare lake bed. This is kind of a historic or ancient lake that used to exist in the San Joaquin Valley of California. You can still, looking at satellite imagery valid as of this week, make out that historic lake bed here in the San Joaquin Valley, kind of the southwest corner of the Central Valley here. All the different colors you're seeing on this map, kind of the greens and beiges, those are either natural ground cover across California, or the beige being agricultural areas. That dark blue color there is standing water, and it typically isn't supposed to be there. That's the historic Tulare Lake kind of re-emerging as a result of all this snowpack up in the Sierra Nevada melting, a lot of the rainfall we saw in March, making its way through the river networks, getting in to that historic Tulare lake bed, and it's starting to fill up. And the areas that had been flooded by this, and these dark blue areas, are not small, potentially as big as maybe the Fresno metro area in terms of square mileage, or something like the Bakersfield metro area. So significant flooding occurring already, and we really haven't even gotten into the heart of that snowmelt season. So this could potentially get worse for this area here. It's something we're keeping a close eye on, and we could see flooding risks emerge elsewhere across the Central Valley as we melt some of this record snowpack. Again, just predictably, it only has a few places to go. It's either going to melt and come through the hydrology in the reservoirs, be taken up by the foliage of the trees and the ground cover, and then some portion and budget of it is evaporated in the form of sublimation, but it won't be enough to prevent any flooding concerns as we go through April and May here. So something we're going to have to watch for quite a few weeks here as we work through that record snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas and parts of the upper Colorado River Basin. And I think the reason we saw that snowmelt season begin, those kind of graphs peak there just in the last few days as we've had the warm-up begin over the last kind of 48 to 72 hours across the west. That's the map we're looking at here, just the last 72 hours of temperature anomalies. You can certainly see California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona have been warm over those same snowpack areas that we were just talking about. So no surprise that we've started to see some of that snow melt. Pacific Northwest has remained cooler, and I think that's going to be the case going forward when we look into the forecast here. Current temperatures as of Wednesday afternoon here, warm across Arizona. We're getting some warmth into the Central Valley of California's upper 60s, warmer in Nevada. Sierra Nevadas certainly look cold here, and we'd expect that given all the snowpack there, but we've warmed those up too, at least comparatively, with temperatures getting into the 40s, enough to start to melt a little bit some of that snowpack that is held up there in the upper elevations. Kind of jumping over to the northwestern portion of the United States here. If you look closely at some of these low clouds here coming in from the northwest here into Oregon and Washington, that's a cold front and really a weather system that's making its way across the Pacific Northwest this evening. It will kind of continue to spin up and work its way through Idaho and eventually into Montana as we go through the night into Thursday. Tomorrow, snowfall expected for some of the upper elevation mountain ranges in the Mountain West here in the northern Colorado Rockies. Colder weather certainly on the backside of this cold front here. Currently making out some snow showers across central Oregon here and potentially some rain showers in the Willamette Valley. If we take a look at the radar to get a clearer picture of what's going on here, again, valid as of Wednesday afternoon, you can see some of those rain showers kind of spinning around this low pressure system, kind of following this cold front into the area and these cooler temperatures here that are moving in. Again, expecting this system to wrap up and start to impact upper elevations in terms of snowfall, Idaho, and western Montana. You can see that's really kind of already begun here along the Bitterroot Range. As far as looking at all hazards map from NOAA, just kind of looking at some of that watches and advisories that they're concerned about at this time. Kind of one important one, the Willamette Valley frost advisory is out for early tomorrow morning, Thursday morning. Temperatures expected to be anywhere between 30 degrees Fahrenheit and 32 or 33 degrees Fahrenheit in the upper Willamette Valley. So we'll be watching for frost there tomorrow morning. Again, right now the temperature is expected to be below freezing in that 30 to 32 degrees Fahrenheit range there. Some wind advisories in California just as a result of this cold front coming through. Winds will be picked up a bit. And then this kind of pink and purple color here, winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories, where the system is expected to spin up through Idaho and Montana over the next 24 hours or so. As far as the forecast beyond that, I'll make this kind of valid as of Wednesday evening. There's that system moving through Oregon, Idaho, and eventually Montana. You can see certainly what's prompted the winter storm warnings there. Heavy snow going through parts of Montana. As we go through Thursday into early Friday, perhaps just a weak system moving through the northern Colorado Rockies here. Some light snow showers, nothing too significant. As we go into the day on Saturday, this is when I think we're going to see our next warm-up. You'll notice it clears out a bit as we lose some of the clouds and the rain and the snow. We kind of naturally warm up across the western U.S. in April and May. So expecting something of a warm-up on Saturday. You'll notice that through Sunday, apart from kind of a glancing blow with some heavier precip into far northwest Washington and British Columbia, we're staying largely clear through early Sunday across the west. And that changes only when we get into Monday night. Looking at Sunday night, our next weather maker coming into the Pacific Northwest, rainfall and potentially snow in the Cascades impacting Washington, Oregon, and perhaps far northern California Sunday evening. I think that kind of reaches its peak overnight Sunday, late Sunday after sunset. That system kind of quickly works through and is followed up by another pulse or another weather system very quickly on Monday p.m. coming through Oregon, kind of more focused on Oregon and northern California with heavy rain expected along the coastlines, snow in the upper elevations east along the Cascades and the Klamath Mountains. And this really kind of sticks around through Tuesday, through midday Tuesday. It kind of exits the area in Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana Tuesday afternoon. We're all the way out to next week, but you'll notice potentially another system coming in behind it. I won't focus too much on that because we've kind of gone back and forth in some of these models as to where this system will end up mid to late next week, but certainly seeing an active period for the Pacific Northwest and potentially northern California as we go through early next week. If we take a look at snowfall amounts through that same time period, certainly heavy snow moving through potentially a foot or more through Idaho and parts of Montana as these systems kind of work and wrap their way up around the Snake River Valley. Cascades certainly getting significant snowfall additions out of this. Some of the coastal mountain ranges expecting significant snowfall. Some of these repeat systems late Sunday into Monday, Tuesday, and then potentially yet another one on Wednesday. You will notice some of these runs have brought heavy snowfall all the way into the Klamath Mountains of California. Some of them even trying to get some heavier snowfall into the northern Sierra Nevada mountains. We're kind of keeping an eye on this. Some of these runs focusing more in far northern California, but some of them have gotten rainfall all the way as far south as San Francisco, potentially some rain showers moving through there midweek next week, and maybe something like a rain shower moving through the Sacramento area late next week. Just depends on how far south this system gets. Again, that's really talking all the way a week out. It's hard to pinpoint exact cities and locations when we're talking about that time range and forecasting. No surprise that one thing we are confident about is the cooler weather that's expected. With some of these storm systems coming through, we expect more cold fronts similar to the one we're seeing this afternoon here. That will keep temperatures down. We do get that brief warm up on the weekend. I think it'll be a pretty nice weekend across the western United States, save for far northwest Washington. But it won't be enough to affect the 7-day temperature anomaly here. Just all the storminess and cold fronts that are yet to come early next week, I think will keep the next 7 days cooler than average, apart from some locations in far southeast California or Arizona or New Mexico. Precipitation anomalies over the same time period. Not a surprise, I think, to see the bullseye over Oregon and Washington, kind of the focus of that jet stream and the storm systems as they come through, but still significant amounts getting into central Idaho and western Montana in the form of snowfall. Perhaps some patchy above anomalous rainfall in parts of northern California. Again, kind of depending on where things shake out next week in terms of the southern extent of these systems. To look kind of at some of the variability there, or even the forecast beyond that, we'll turn to our trusted friend, the Pacific Jet Stream forecast. This one from the GFS Ensemble, valid as of Wednesday evening when I'm recording this video. There's that system kind of making its way through Idaho and Montana, prompting those winter storm warnings that we watched. As we go through the weekend, this is valid as of midday Saturday. You'll notice this ridge in the upper levels of the jet stream kind of right here over the western U.S. Ridges tend to promote warmer weather, so we'd expect kind of warmer temperatures moving into parts of the west here, and that's expected this weekend. And they tend to promote drier weather, all else equal. And so this is kind of the influence or the reasoning behind that drier, kind of calmer, nice forecast for this weekend. But you'll notice as I kind of step into early next week, that ridge is short-lived and is quickly replaced by a Gulf of Alaska trough, now bringing in yet again another weather system, weather maker through parts of the Pacific Northwest. If I step this all the way through Wednesday, we keep this upper level trough here in the Gulf of Alaska, but we're now focusing more flow over California. That's prompting some of that precipitation and snowfall to get into parts of northern California, Nevada, and southern Idaho, kind of at the end of that forecast here. If I take this out even further, you'll notice that the model is trying to keep kind of that Gulf of Alaska, British Columbia trough around and keep some of that jet stream flow focused over northern California. If this comes to fruition, this GFS solution here, I think that area is going to stay cooler and is going to stay wet across northern California, Oregon, and the Intermountain West. That's looking out late next week. And if I take it even farther than that, we're getting way too far in the forecast here. You'll notice kind of a continuation of that pattern, potentially even seeing something get into the Central Valley of California. If we look at the ECMWF, we just looked at the GFS. ECMWF, the European model, a little bit different. Sometimes we put more weight on the European model. I've just gone ahead and taken it all the way out to not this Sunday, but next Sunday, April 23rd. And you'll notice it does have flow coming onshore over California. Again, just kind of drawing the jet stream here off of the coast of Japan, and then something of a ridge with flow coming into southern Oregon and northern California. But you'll notice it's more of a ridge. It's kind of a jet stream rounding more of a ridge off the western coast of the United States, and less of a trough. The GFS had more of a trough here in the Gulf of Alaska and was focusing flow more west to east across California. That leads me to think the European model will have less precipitation over this time period. I think you could still get some coastal rainfall, potentially some light mountain snow out of a pattern like this, but it'll be less focused, less magnified than the GFS solution we were just looking at for the end of next week and potentially a few days after that as we get into that last week of April. If you look at the European model, precipitation anomalies for the 7 days from April 20th to April 27th, again, kind of that getting into that last week of April here, notice above average precip for coastal Northern California, coastal Oregon, and even some patchy spots in Washington here. But as a result of that ridge, kind of with that northwest flow, that brings less precipitation in, less amplification of the flow. We wouldn't expect as strong of systems coming into this area, which is why this isn't the biggest precipitation signal we've seen this year, certainly for parts of the Pacific Northwest and California. If I jump over to the GFS solution again, April 20th through April 27th, you'll notice just reorienting that jet stream out of the west to east rather than the northwest to southeast brings in significantly more precipitation to the northern Sierra Nevadas, the Klamath Mountains, more coastal precipitation, even potentially getting some rain showers through San Francisco and into the North Valley, and certainly Oregon and Washington getting more precipitation out of the GFS solution. Hard to say which one kind of has a better clue as to what's going to happen right now. I'm leaning a bit toward the GFS. The European model tends to do better on average when we look over kind of long time scales or long and large geographic regions. But we've just been so persistent in this wet Pacific Northwest pattern over the last few weeks. It makes me feel like we're going to continue kind of that troughiness in the Gulf of Alaska and continue kind of that active weather over the next 2 weeks or so. The Climate Prediction Center and National Weather Service forecast for the same time period, April 20th through April 26th, kind of closely aligning with that same time frame we just looked at. They're forecasting above average precip for California, Nevada, above average for Oregon and Washington, not quite to the same degree. As you can see, I would suggest they're kind of leaning toward that GFS solution here, at least looking at the map on the right there. Kind of regardless of which forecast shakes out, I think a higher confidence that we're going to keep that cooler temperature pattern around for California, Oregon, and Washington, as we just have very cold ocean waters off the west coast of the United States, kind of in this area here, just very cold ocean waters, and that's moderating the temperatures as they come onshore in the western U.S., keeping them cooler. If we look just kind of curiously at the ECMWF weeklies, this is looking out April 15th all the way to May 15th, and you'll notice kind of a continuation of that wetter pattern for coastal Oregon, coastal northern California, curiously parts of eastern Washington, but drier in the Sierra Nevadas, drier in Nevada, Arizona, central and southern California, potentially a bit wetter or more active in the Pacific Northwest. And this kind of aligns with our forecast that we were talking about earlier for the month of April and perhaps the beginning of May, where we're drier, kind of central California and south, Nevada, Utah, and south, but dealing with potentially a more active pattern across the Pacific Northwest. Wouldn't put too much weight into kind of specific areas right now, whether the Cascades will be dry, but this is just kind of the general pattern that we've seen over the next 30 days or so. Temperatures as a result of those cooler ocean waters off the west coast of the U.S. expected to have their influence over colder weather as we go forward through the end of April. This has these cooler temperatures lasting all the way through early May. I would expect some kind of seasonal trend in these temperatures as we go out further into the forecast, and these cooler ocean waters off the west coast of the United States will, there's some sense or fork in the forecast that those may start to warm up, which would help the temperatures warm up a bit on the western coast of the U.S., but not, unfortunately, in the immediate future. These warm-ups tend to be brief that we've seen. The good news is that we'll slow down the snow melt and the concerns for the flooding that we were talking about at the beginning of the video. And to kind of put this into perspective here, the reason that I keep talking about that colder ocean water off the west coast of the U.S. is we're still in the negative phase of the PDO, if I can draw that with my little drawing thing there. Not the best handwriting using a mouse here, but nonetheless, this is the colder ocean waters we're looking at sea surface temperatures anomalies across the globe. Certainly these stand out here off the west coast of North America. That's helping to put more troughs in the Gulf of Alaska. We talked about how that kind of focuses that jet stream on Oregon and potentially Northern California, Washington, keeping that period or that area active. And there's kind of this self-fulfilling reinforcement here. Because these temperatures are cooler, that tends to promote more troughiness in the area, which tends to bring more storms through the area. That mixes up the water, upwells some colder water from below in the eastern Pacific, and it keeps these water temperatures cooler. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the negative PDO, and I think that's having a large influence on the weather in the western U.S. right now. And just given how cold these waters are, it takes a while to warm these up. I would expect that influence to continue certainly over the next 2 weeks, but potentially even the next 4 to 6 weeks as we look into May, talking about a higher chance for colder temperatures and a more active period, at least for the Pacific Northwest. Looking out beyond that, the conversation quickly turns to ENSO. That is the El Niño Southern Oscillation. Will we see an El Niño develop this summer in the Pacific Ocean? least as far as the ECMWF, the European model, is concerned, that answer is a resounding yes. You're seeing all the different ensemble model runs from the ECMWF here. We're currently INSO neutral. We've been in INSO neutral since early March. Here we are kind of in April, and you'll notice that just about every ensemble model or member agrees here that we will be quickly warming up into an El Nino in the Pacific at some point in 2023. Some of these rather aggressive, getting us into an El Nino as early as June. These forecasts have been too aggressive in the past in terms of warming us up into an El Nino in the summer. A little bit skeptical as to how aggressive this warm-up might be, but nonetheless, there's a lot of model agreement here. If I had to put percentages on this, we'd probably getting into the 70% range in terms of will we see an El Nino by September in 2023. That's not 100%. We're still talking about 70% here, so it's not a slam dunk by any means, but we are trending toward getting into an El Nino at some point in 2023, potentially as early as June, July, or August of this summer. Now, the European model, if we look out at their seasonal forecast, we kind of know based on looking at this image that they are forecasting that aggressive warm-up into an El Nino by summer of 2023. And we're seeing a very summer El Nino-like precipitation forecast for them across the United States. This is looking at precipitation anomalies from the European seasonal model, June, July, and August, summer of this year. And we typically see more rainfall across the central United States and some of these major growing regions during El Nino. So we're seeing, I think, the reflection and influence of that. Kind of curiously, we aren't seeing a fast start to the monsoon season in the desert Southwest. I think that's something of a reflection that we might not see as much kind of Intermountain West heat this summer as a result, because the monsoon is kind of fueled by that heat there. So if we're seeing a slow start to the monsoon here, we might see less heat in this area. That could be good news for some of these folks trying to avoid wildfires after a rainy spring and winter. Less of a signal on the West Coast. We don't see kind of a big wet or dry signal across California, Oregon, and Washington. Temperature trends, we could be dealing with some heat waves just as we kind of warm up the ocean waters in the Pacific. We could get some influence in terms of these coastal temperatures on the west coast of Washington, Oregon, and California. Kind of too early to say anything definitive there, but given the new growth we expect, kind of coming out of a drought, getting a lot of water on some of these hillsides, we're expecting kind of new growth, which if you kind of flash drought that and dry that out quickly in summer can become kindling potentially for some concerning wildfires. So we will be watching for heat waves as we kind of go through summer, certainly the end of summer being the big wildfire season out west. That is all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for watching.